Ravi Malhotra thought a fake marriage would buy him a future. Jennifer Clark believed quick cash would solve her problems, and Dylan Clark was convinced he had to protect his sister. Three lives tangled in lies, greed, and rage that spiraled into a deadly revenge plot no one saw coming. The Crime Scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. Ravi Malhotra stepped off the plane in Toronto with a battered suitcase, a head full of promises, and the crushing weight of his family's sacrifices. At just 24, he carried the hopes of his entire household back in India, where his father had mortgaged their modest home to send him abroad. Canada wasn't just a place for education. It was supposed to be his golden ticket to a better life, a chance to escape the grinding poverty he grew up in. But reality hit him faster than the icy wind outside the airport. Tuition fees were steep, rent was outrageous, and part-time jobs paid just enough to keep him afloat, but nowhere near enough to pay off the debts waiting back home. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his parents, asking about his studies and reminding him of the loans. The pressure gnawed at him every single day. At first, Ravi tried to do things by the book. He studied hard, pulled late-night shifts at a convenience store, and took on odd jobs to make ends meet. But no matter how many hours he worked, the money never stretched far enough. He watched other international students slide into comfortable lives through marriages of convenience, where citizenship wasn't about love, but about survival. The whispers of quick cash and permanent residency grew louder in his circles, and Ravi couldn't ignore them. By the time his first year ended, he realized that playing by the rules would only keep him drowning. He needed a shortcut, something bold, something risky. That's when the idea of a sham marriage stopped sounding like a scam and started sounding like salvation. Ravi convinced himself it wasn't betrayal, it was strategy. All he had to do was find the right partner, and his path in Canada would be sealed. What he didn't know was that this choice, born out of desperation, would drag him into a dark world of lies, betrayal, and violence that no textbook or lecture could have prepared him for. Ravi's plan moved faster than he expected once he tapped into the underground network of people willing to set up marriage for residency deals. He was introduced to Jennifer Clark, a 29-year-old Canadian woman who carried her own baggage. Jennifer was drowning in debt, juggling overdue bills, and a drinking problem she couldn't shake. When she heard Ravi was willing to pay her thousands of dollars to marry him, it sounded like a lifeline. For Ravi, she was the perfect solution, desperate enough to play along and ordinary enough to pass under the radar of immigration officers. Their arrangement was all business. Ravi promised her a total of $25,000, split into installments, in exchange for her hand in a staged marriage. They rehearsed their story like actors preparing for a play. How they supposedly met at a campus cafe, what Ravi's favorite food was, even which side of the bed he slept on. Immigration interviews were known to get personal, and they couldn't afford to slip up. To seal the illusion, they staged a small wedding in a rented banquet hall with a few paid guests. Photos were snapped of Ravi in a crisp suit and Jennifer in a cheap white dress, both smiling wide for the cameras. On the surface, it looked like a couple celebrating their new life together. Behind closed doors, they barely exchanged words unless it was about paperwork or money. Jennifer kept up appearances by occasionally posting selfies with Ravi on social media, while he sent the same pictures back home to India, feeding his family's belief that he had found love abroad. But the cracks were already showing. Ravi's payments came slower than Jennifer expected, and she grew resentful. To her, he was another man using her, only this time for a visa instead of affection. To Ravi, she was just a pawn in his bigger plan. Neither realized that this cold, transactional partnership would soon spiral out of control, attracting attention from people who had no tolerance for scams or lies. The marriage scam seemed airtight at first. Ravi attended classes, worked odd jobs, and kept his fake marriage with Jennifer looking believable on the outside. They took staged pictures in parks, smiled at family dinners with a few of Jennifer's friends, and even kept toothbrushes at each other's apartments to sell the illusion. But beneath the polished exterior, things were unraveling. Jennifer had grown tired of waiting for the rest of her payment. The initial cash Ravi gave her had disappeared into overdue bills and nights out drinking, and now she wanted the other half immediately. Ravi, already stretched thin, stalled with excuses, promising the money was coming soon. What Jennifer didn't know was that Ravi had doubled down on his scheme. Through whispers in his community, he connected with another Canadian woman willing to marry for money. He figured that if one marriage could secure him status, two would double his chances and speed up the process. It was a reckless gamble, but desperation made it feel like genius. He told himself he could juggle both stories without getting caught. But small-town neighborhoods have big mouths. Jennifer's erratic behavior didn't go unnoticed, and neither did Ravi's. People whispered about how strange it was that Jennifer barely acted like a newlywed. Meanwhile, Ravi was spotted around town with the second woman, looking far too comfortable for someone supposedly in a happy marriage. The gossip grew louder until it landed in the wrong ears. Jennifer's drinking buddies began piecing things together, laughing about the obvious scam and hinting at Ravi's double life. Those whispers reached someone who cared deeply about Jennifer and wasn't about to let her be humiliated or exploited. The story that had started as a quiet arrangement between two desperate people was turning into a public secret, and the walls around Ravi's carefully built plan were starting to close in. Jennifer's younger brother, Dylan Clark, had always been overprotective of her. He was a rough-around-the-edges construction worker with a short fuse and a strong sense of loyalty to family. When the whispers about Ravi's scam reached him, Dylan didn't brush them off. He started asking questions, watching how his sister lived, and piecing together the puzzle. It didn't take long for him to realize that Jennifer's so-called marriage wasn't a marriage at all. She wasn't in love, she wasn't happy, and she sure wasn't living with a husband who cared about her. To Dylan, it looked like Ravi was just another outsider using his sister for a quick payday. His anger only grew when he spotted Ravi out in public with another woman, laughing and holding hands like an actual couple. Dylan snapped a few photos on his phone, proof that this husband was living a double life. He stormed to Jennifer's apartment to confront her, but instead of being outraged, she shrugged it off. The money Ravi had promised her kept her hooked, and she didn't want to throw away what she thought was easy cash. That cut Dylan deeper than he expected. It wasn't just Ravi's scam that bothered him. It was watching his sister willingly drown in it. Determined to take matters into his own hands, Dylan made calls to immigration fraud investigators. He sent the photos, reported the sham marriage, and thought he'd done his part. But that's when the situation turned strange. The case didn't move forward, and Ravi seemed unfazed. Dylan started to believe someone inside the system had been paid off, someone keeping Ravi safe from consequences. The betrayal lit a fire in Dylan that couldn't be put out. If the law wasn't going to handle it, he would. In his mind, Ravi wasn't just scamming the government. He was destroying his sister's life. Dylan's rage was no longer about money or fraud. It became personal, a vendetta fueled by pride, humiliation, and a need for payback. Dylan thought reporting Ravi would end the nightmare, but instead it pulled him into something even more dangerous. Days after he filed the complaint, he walked out to his truck and found the windows smashed, glass scattered across the seat. A note was taped to the steering wheel, written in bold black marker. "Stay out of this, or it won't just be glass breaking." The message was clear. Someone knew what he had done, and they weren't bluffing. Dylan's stomach churned with rage and fear, but he refused to back down. If anything, the threat only made him more determined to put Ravi in the ground. Jennifer begged him to leave it alone, insisting it wasn't worth the trouble, but Dylan couldn't let it go. He watched his sister spiral further into drinking, clinging to the cash Ravi occasionally handed her, and he blamed every bit of it on that scam artist. The more he thought about the smashed windows, the more he convinced himself that Ravi wasn't working alone. Somebody had his back, maybe dangerous people with connections strong enough to stall an investigation. The idea that Ravi could buy his way out of trouble made Dylan's blood boil. Meanwhile, Ravi continued his life as if nothing had happened. He smiled for staged photos, walked hand in hand with his second wife, and kept weaving lies that only deepened his fraud. His confidence looked like arrogance to Dylan, and each time he saw Ravi walking free, it gnawed at him. The legal system wasn't going to stop this scam, Dylan decided. The warning note hadn't scared him, it had lit a fuse. In his mind, the only way to end this was to handle it himself. What had started as anger over a sham marriage had transformed into something darker, a thirst for vengeance that pushed him past the point of no return. Dylan wasn't thinking about consequences anymore. He was planning payback, and when that chance came, He intended to make sure Ravi never scammed anyone again. The November air in Brampton was sharp enough to sting, the kind of cold that cut straight through layers. Ravi stepped out of his apartment that night dressed in a thin jacket, unaware that someone was trailing him. He had just left a meeting with his second wife, smug from another round of staged pictures they planned to use for immigration proof. He felt untouchable, convinced the threats against him were empty. What he didn't know was that Dylan had been following him for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. The parking lot behind an old strip mall was nearly empty, lit only by a few flickering lamps. Ravi pulled in, scrolling on his phone, distracted by messages from his family back in India. That's when Dylan's truck rolled up behind him, headlights off. Ravi barely had time to react before Dylan jumped out, fueled by days of simmering rage and months of watching his sister's life unravel. The two collided in a blur of fists and shouts, the sound of struggle echoing off the cold pavement. Witnesses from a nearby bar later said it looked like chaos, two men locked in a violent storm. Ravi tried to fight back, but Dylan's fury was overwhelming. A knife glinted under the weak light, flashing in and out of sight as the fight grew more desperate. Ravi's cries were swallowed by the night until he collapsed, blood soaking through his jacket, pooling on the frozen ground. By the time the first police cruiser arrived, Ravi was gasping for breath, his eyes wide with shock and terror. Dylan stood nearby, his hands trembling, his face pale under the parking lot's weak glow. He muttered under his breath, as if convincing himself it was justice. The officers didn't have to chase him. He didn't run. For Dylan, the act was the answer to everything he thought Ravi had stolen from his family. But in that moment, the line between justice and murder vanished, leaving only the aftermath of rage written in blood. The morning after the attack, headlines splashed across Canadian news outlets. An international student murdered in what police described as a violent altercation tied to immigration fraud. The story spread like wildfire, sparking debates about sham marriages, exploitation, and the growing black market that preyed on desperate students. Ravi's name became a symbol of the risks young immigrants took when cornered by debt and pressure. For his grieving family back in India, the news was devastating. They had sold land, borrowed money, and pinned all their hopes on his success. Instead of celebrating his achievements, they were handed a coffin shipped across an ocean, their dreams buried with him. Authorities pieced together the case quickly. Dylan Clark didn't deny what he had done. To him, it wasn't a crime, it was payback. He claimed Ravi had destroyed his sister's life, scammed the system, and mocked the very laws that let him stay. His confession painted him less as a criminal and more as a man consumed by vengeance. The jury didn't buy his excuses, and a guilty verdict landed him a lengthy prison sentence for second-degree murder. He entered prison with no sense of victory, only the heavy silence of a man who had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Jennifer disappeared almost as quickly as the case closed. Rumors swirled that she moved to another province under a new name, running from the shame of being tied to both the scam and the bloodshed it caused. Neighbors who once whispered about her fake marriage now pitted her, saying she had been a pawn in a game that spun out of control. In the end, nobody walked away unscarred. Ravi lost his life, Dylan lost his freedom, Jennifer lost her identity, and two families were left shattered. What started as a scheme for survival ended as a brutal tragedy, proof that lies built for quick gain can spiral into a chain of destruction far beyond anyone's control.